Hi, I'm Jacob Gallucci, and right now I'd like to talk about other TV shows and movies that I liked when I was a kid. And everything that I'll be talking about today I didn't mention in my other videos about TV shows and movies that I liked when I was a kid. And anyway, here are some of my other favorite TV shows from when I was younger. ABC used to have a Friday night lineup known as TGIF. It was family. It was a bunch of family-friendly shows, and these shows included Full House, Family Matters, and Step by Step. And there's one that I forgot to mention last week. Well, actually, a couple weeks ago when I did the other video, it was the show Dinosaurs. Dinosaurs was a great show. It was about this family of dinosaurs, and it was really a good show. I loved it. And another show I liked, it was on, I remember it being on Sunday nights. It was America's Funniest Home Videos, and Bob Saget was the host. In the early episodes, Bob Saget was the host, and he was hosting that show at the same time as when he was on Full House. And there was a show similar to it, hosted by Dave Coulier, and it was co-hosted with Arlene Sorkin initially, and then later on Tawny Katane. And that show was called America's Funniest People. That was on Sunday nights too. I remember it being on after America's Funniest Home Videos with Bob Saget. And Dave Coulier was on the show at the same time as when he was on Full House. And there was another like family-oriented show on ABC that I watched when I was really young. It was called Perfect Strangers. Remember, with Balky and Cousin Larry, and I remember watching it in reruns on Channel 9 here in Chicago, WGN, and I remember when it was on too. It was on ABC, and there were other things I liked. Even as a little kid, I loved sports shows. There was this show called Rogan's Heroes, not Hogan's Heroes with Bob Crane, but Rogan's Heroes. It was hosted by this Los Angeles sportscaster named Fred Rogan, and it was on Saturday afternoons on Channel 5 at 4:30 p.m. And it was either 4 or 4:30. I remember 4 o'clock they had old Married with Children episodes, like the Steve era episodes, and at 4:30 they would show Rogan's Heroes. And Rogan's Heroes was really funny. It really was. It was sort of like America's Funniest Home Videos. He would show a bunch of random videos, and there were also a bunch of sports blooper videos as well. And there was a guy on the show with Fred Rogan. His name was Officer Feldman. He was this fat, this short, fat, dopey-looking guy, and he had a bald head, and he sort of looked like a cross between Curly Howard of the Three Stooges, and Charlie Weiss, the former Notre Dame football head coach. And the funny thing about Officer Feldman was that he didn't talk. He just stood there like an idiot, and he was hilarious. He really was. And I never figured out I've never figured out what the actor's name was who played Officer Feldman, but whatever his name is, he's really funny. He was really funny, and Fred Rogan was great too. And I also watched, this was on Sunday nights, it was the George Michael Sports Machine. It was hosted by George Michael. He's a sportscaster, and I love that show. I used to watch it all the time. That was one of my favorites. And locally, I also watched Sports Sunday. It was on Channel 5, NBC5 here in Chicago. That was on Sunday nights at 10:35 until 11:05, and the Sports Machine was on from 11:05 until 11:35. And I also watched Svengoolie. Svengoolie's great. He's awesome. He's on Channel 26. He still is, and he's played by Rich Coase, and he's probably one of my comedy idols. He really is. Svengoolie's awesome. He's amazing. I watched a lot of cooking shows when I was younger too. I watched The Frugal Gourmet with Jeff Smith, Yan Can Cook with Martin Yan, and then that other show. It was hosted by Justin Wilson, the Cajun chef. I watched that as well. All those shows were on Channel 11, and I also watched Julia Child when I was younger, and I watched a lot of grown-up shows when I was a kid too, like The Simpsons and Married with Children, Seinfeld, Cheers, All in the Family, The Andy Griffith Show, Home Improvement, Saturday Night Live, The Wonder Years, I Love Lucy, The Honeymooners. This is all written down. I'm just reading it off the list. Malcolm in the Middle, The Critic, and I watched this show that was on Channel 11, PBS here in Chicago. It's WTTW Channel 11. It was about this little Jack Russell Terrier, and the show was called Wishbone. Remember Wishbone? That was a cool show. I liked Wishbone, and I watched a lot of game shows back then, like Jeopardy, The Price is Right, Wheel of Fortune, Family Feud, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, The Weakest Link. I watched the Guinness World Records primetime series. That was on Fox. I watched American Gladiators. That was syndicated, and locally it was on Channel 50, WPWR TV, and I watched the Three Stooges back then. That was also on Channel 50, I should say. And American Gladiators, I remember being on Saturday night. The Three Stooges was on Sunday nights, and I also watched Benny Hill, and that was on Channel 66. WGBO. Before it became a Spanish station, it was an English station, and I remember watching Benny Hill on there. And I also watched, I loved Winnie the Pooh when I was a kid. I also watched The World's Funniest. That was another show of bloopers. That was hosted by James Brown, and there were blooper videos on there, and like videos from like different families and stuff. And I also I watched a lot of other like old shows like Mork and Mindy, and going a little off topic here, but it's sad about Robin Williams. He was great. He's one of my comedy idols. It's so sad that he died. But I watched Mork and Mindy as a kid, Happy Days, Laverne and Shirley, and let's see. I liked infomercials as a kid too. There was one I really loved. It was for the Jetstream oven. The Jetstream oven was this oven, and it was really a good infomercial. The guy who created it, his name was Dave Dornbush. He hosted the infomercial, and he looked exactly like Peter Griffin from Family Guy. He looked exactly like him. He had the glasses, and he was fat, and he had the dark hair. He kind of sounded like Peter Griffin too. He died a few years ago, I believe, but he was good. He seemed like a nice guy, and anyway, there were some movies I loved when I was a kid too. I loved The Brave Little Toaster. The Brave Little Toaster is really good. Honey, I Shrunk the Kids I loved. I liked the other ones too, like Honey, I Blew Up the Kid and Honey, We Shrunk Ourselves. And I also liked Little Giants. Little Giants was a good movie. Clifford, it's a weird film, but I liked that. It was with Martin Short and Charles Grodin. I also loved the Pee Wee Herman films, and Pee Wee's Playhouse was one of my favorites. That was one of my favorite TV shows. I also remember watching other movies like Baby's Day Out, Dennis the Menace, The Wizard of Oz I loved, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, Home Alone 3. It's not as good as the first two, but I remember watching that. The Ernest movies with Jim Varney. And also the Ernest TV show, I remember watching that. And Weird Al Yankovic had his own show too, the Weird Al Show. That was a good show too. It was a lot like Pee Wee's Playhouse and Ernest P. Worrell's TV show. And I remember watching The Nutty Professor with Eddie Murphy. I watched a lot of the Mel Brooks films like Blazing Saddles, Young Frankenstein, and The Producers, among others. The Naked Gun movies I loved, the Airplane movies, The Cable Guy with Jim Carrey I watched as a kid, and it's probably not a good movie for kids to watch, but it's really a good film. It's weird, but it's a good film. Rookie of the Year I watched. Sandlot I watched. The Flintstones movie I watched. You know, the one with John Goodman and Rick Moranis. I watched a lot of Adam Sandler movies like Billy Madison, Happy Gilmore, The Wedding Singer, The Waterboy, and Big Daddy. I watched a lot of movies starring Chris Farley. A lot of movies with Chris Farley in them, like The Coneheads I watched. The Coneheads I like. That's a good movie. The Wayne's World movies I watched. Let's see. Tommy Boy, Black Sheep, Beverly Hills Ninja, Almost Heroes. I watched that. I watched a lot of movies with Robin Williams too. Again, it's awful about what happened with him, and he was great. He's one of my favorites. I've always liked Robin Williams. He's one of my comedy idols. He really is. I watched Hook, Mrs. Doubtfire, Jumanji, Popeye, Aladdin. He was the voice of the genie. And anyway, those are just some of the other TV shows and movies that I liked when I was a kid. And I'm sorry for rambling, but anyway, I'll be back. I have another video to present today, and anyway, stay tuned for that.